honest answers to awkward questions. With Lucy Maskell, sponsored by Urban Saints.
Welcome to Awkward, the show that gives honest answers to awkward questions, and I'm your hostess, the mostess, till 7 o'clock today. This is Lucy Maskell, live on London DAB Radio and across the nation at www.premiergospel.org.uk. It is great to have you in the studio with us, Mark Arnold. Hello, Mark.
Hey Lucy, great to be here. Really just a joy to be able to share this time with you. Thanks for having me on.
Yes, hello Mark. Mark is my special guest today. He is from Urban Saints. He does the executive work there. He also is very much involved with disability and inclusivity as well within the church, aren't you?
Absolutely, yeah. My day job is looking after operations at Urban Saints, but when they let me out to play, one of the things I get to do is to talk about inclusion and about how to make what we do in our churches, in our youth and children's work, more accessible and inclusive for the children and young people that we meet there.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much. You come all the way from sunny Bournemouth. I'm sure you'd want to be on the beach, but thank you for being in the studio today.
Well, sunny Bournemouth is a beautiful place, but it's great to be here too.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Mark. So today, guys, we're going to be talking about disability in the church, about autism, Asperger's syndrome. You might have heard the tragic story today and last night of Elliot Rogers in California, a young man who has shot several people. He actually, on reports, has been diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome, and so this is actually quite a relevant topic even this week. So if you've got any shout-outs you want to give out, I'll give you a Sunday shout out. Tweet me at Premier Gospel. Let me know where you're listening, whether you are on the beach, in Bournemouth, you might be up in sunny Scotland, or you could be in America, Africa. Let me know. Drop me a tweet at Premier Gospel. You can also get in contact via Facebook. Just like our page, facebook.com/Premier Gospel, and post your thoughts on tonight's show. So on with it. So Mark, we're going to be talking about autism today.
Yeah.
I know you are you have a son called James who is autistic, am I right?
Absolutely, yeah. So James is 12 years old next Sunday, actually. So he's just coming up to his 12th birthday. And when he was 2.5, he was diagnosed with autism and some associated learning difficulties. And we've been on a journey with him since then. And it's a journey that has been a wonderful journey. We decided at that early stage that we weren't going to let James's diagnosis define him and be the defining moment in his life or in ours as a family, and we've just let him be an inspiration to us and let him just be leading us, and as God has led us, into being able to just share our journey and share the experiences and the things that we've learned with others to help them who are on a similar journey to us.
Absolutely. Well, thanks so much for being able to share your story with us today, because I know it's quite a personal journey. He's 12 years old, is that right? We're going to be 12 next week.
He's going to be 12 next Sunday. So yeah, we've seen him grow up, we've seen him develop, and we've seen God use him and his autism to just change the direction of what we're doing, and how we're able to just take his story and the message that we've picked up from seeing him develop and working with other children and young people, and working with other leaders to just make a difference to children and young people that are on the autism spectrum. It's a great journey to be on. Well,
shout out to Urban Saints. Mark works for Urban Saints. He heads up, actually. Urban Saints are the charity that sponsor Awkward, so shout out to you, shout out to Paul as well, and everyone who's listening from there.
Great to say hi to the Urban Saints guys. Actually, my boss would disagree that I run it, but I head up operations, so that's my job.
Yeah, I'd say you're the boss of operations.
Okay.
Anyway, on with the show. So Mark, please would you be able to share some of your story with James, starting from birth, because how much did you know about autism before you had James?
So really, we didn't know very much about autism at all. We knew it existed, we knew of it, but really what it actually meant in real day-to-day terms, we just had no idea at all. And so when James, his development was much slower. We have an older daughter, Phoebe, she's 14. And we very quickly realised that James was different to Phoebe. His development was very different to hers. And so we went on a journey of trying to understand why that was. A number of theories came through. But eventually, when he was 2.5, he was diagnosed with autism. And once we knew what we were then dealing with, we then were able to help him, work with him, and work with the other, the preschool he was at, for example, to be able to get the most from him and to be able to develop him as much as he was able to, and to really go on that journey of discovery really with him, which has been our path for the past 9.5 years. So yeah, it's been a great journey, and we've seen various stages of his development in that, but we've also seen God releasing through us a message to the church, which is about inclusion and which is about making what we do accessible to all the children and young people that we engage with, whether they have autism or other additional needs or disabilities.
Yes, you work with different young people, don't you? You work with people with Down syndrome and Asperger's syndrome, ADHD as well.
Well, across our churches, across the groups that connect to us, and we, through Urban Saints, we reach almost 1,300 churches and groups across the UK. And many of them will have in their churches or in the communities around them children with additional needs and disabilities of many different kinds. I mean, the statistics are huge, but approximately 20%, 1 in 5 of all children and young people have some kind of additional need. It could be something on the autism spectrum. It could be dyslexia, it could be Downs, it could be a physical disability, it could be a hearing or sight disability, a whole range of different things. But 1 in 5, and you think there's 10 million children and young people across the UK, so that's 2 million children and young people that need a little bit of extra help, that need to be included in a different way, and to be able to access what we do in a more supported way. And that's really the message, is to try and help churches and those involved in children's and youth work to think about how to be more inclusive with the work that they're doing.
Why do you think this is important, Mark? As in, why should the church engage with disability? Because I think disability is, as you said, something to do with mental disability, but also we think a lot about physical disability. Yeah, that's what we think of. Why do you think it's important?
It's absolutely vital, because so many people, whether they're adults, children, young people, that have additional needs or disabilities can really feel marginalised. They can feel in some ways excluded from church, because not because anybody's deliberately excluded them, but just because the things that we do within church can be making it that much harder for them to be able to access the church service.
You've got some examples. Let's talk about autism. So, for example, in autism, if you're autistic, needs. What is it in churches that maybe is quite hard?
Okay, so some children and young people with autism are very sensitive to different sensory inputs. For example, some of them, my son James is one of these, finds loud noise really, really hard. And so if we bring him into a church environment that right from the beginning is very noisy, very, very loud, lots of conversations going on, lots of loud worship going on, then that can really unsettle him from the very beginning. And so looking at how we make church accessible for James and other children and young people that may have a sensory challenge with loud noise, for example. Just thinking about, well, okay, how can we do that so that everybody else can have a great time and worship and praise and make noise, but people that find that hard can also be a part of that. And so looking at creatively how you can bring those two things together into one church, into one place.
That is something that we need then, definitely. That's so fascinating, because when if I go to church or visit a church, I never think, oh no, there's too many layers of voices. Normally I think, wow, I'm awful at singing. But besides that, I never think, wow, other people with their needs, in the sense of there's so much noise and distractions. Because, let's do an intro to autism, because I know there'll be a lot of people listening who maybe don't know much about it. So what is autism, like basic definition, and tell me more about the symptoms. So, for example, you said, the senses are heightened.
And so the first thing to say about autism is that it's a spectrum disorder. So there are lots of different types or lots of different ways in which autism can affect people. There's no one size fits all for this, but usually there are three things that are common across most people, children, young people and adults
Number one.
that have autism. And number one is around social communication. So my son James has very limited vocabulary. He can say a few words, but not very many. And other children, young people can speak a bit better than that. But some children and young people will use other forms of communication either as their primary method of communicating or to add to verbal communication. They might use sign language, they might use picture symbols and gestures, other ways of communicating. But communicating and social communication can be quite hard. So often a child or young person with autism might find things like body language and facial expression harder to understand.
So what, they can't read into it?
They may not read it as readily as somebody that hasn't got autism might do, and so that can be quite hard. And so when you sort of build up that whole picture of that communication being much more difficult, add to that the fact that
number two.
It's all sort of linked in still with number one.
Okay.
Is that if we were having this conversation in a room of 100 people and they were all having conversations of their own, we could just focus on our conversation and that would work, and everybody else could focus on theirs. But if you have autism, it's really hard to filter out all those other conversations going on, and so you'll hear all those other conversations as well as the conversation you're trying to have. Add to that, you're struggling to communicate effectively anyway, and that really makes it quite a challenge for a lot of children and young people with autism to be able to communicate effectively. The second,
number two,
is social interaction. So partly as a result of those communication problems, it can be hard for children and young people with autism sometimes to make friends, to keep friends. They find it sometimes hard to manage their own feelings and emotions and to understand the feelings and emotions of others as well. Some people say that people with autism lack empathy. But other people actually say that they really are very empathic.
You've got big hearts.
And actually just there's so much input of emotion and feelings going on that sometimes they just have to shut all that out just to protect themselves really from all of that. Because like all the conversations going on, if they're getting all those feelings and emotions as
overwhelming
well, it can be overloading and overwhelming. So that's number two. Number three is all about social imagination. So things like storytelling or creative thinking or just coming up with different ideas for something new that's different to what you've done before. Predicting people's behaviour, knowing what they might do next. All that kind of stuff can be quite hard for a lot of people with autism too. And so, those three things together can sort of demonstrate that actually life can be quite a challenge for
things that we take for granted. Actually, if we don't have autism, I don't think, oh wow, I'm not reading their body language. I'm thinking, oh, I know what they don't want to talk to me. But that's really interesting.
And to try and to understand that if you haven't got autism can be a challenge, because it's a spectrum. All those things that I've just talked about won't be the case for everybody that's got autism. Some things will be more or less
more extreme,
on
right?
Yeah, and so it's figuring out, okay, for this particular person, what does autism mean for them? What's their world like? And so if you've got, for example, two young people in your youth group and they both have autism, they're not going to be the same. They will be just as different as any other two young people. They'll have different personalities, different characters, and autism will affect them in different ways. And so it's really important to look at them separately and then understand what the world looks like for them individually.
Brilliant. Well, I think you've given us a great introduction to autism and the world, what it must be like to be a parent of an autistic son as well. So thank you for that, Mark. We will be back after a few songs. But in the meantime, let me know your thoughts and experiences. Do you have autism yourself? Maybe you are a youth worker and you have a guy or a girl with Asperger's syndrome in your youth group. Or maybe, like Mark, you're a parent, or maybe you just have some friends who have autism. Let me know your thoughts and experiences. Here is how you can get in touch. That's right. You're listening to Awkward on Premier Gospel Music for Life till 7 o'clock. This is Lucy Maskell, hoping you are enjoying the show with some afternoon songs and some great discussion with Mark Arnold, my special guest from Urban Saints, talking about what it's like to have an autistic son and how to help young people who are struggling with different things to do with autism. So, Mark, thank you so much for coming all the way from Bournemouth.
That's great. Thank you.
It's great having you here. So, as we were chatting before the break, your son, James, who's now going to be 12 next week.
Yay.
Woo! Tell me more about the beginnings of his diagnosis of autism and how maybe he's developed as a young person.
Okay, so back when he was 2.5, which was when we finally got the diagnosis, he was very different to how he is now. He was very much in his own little world, so he wouldn't respond to his name. He didn't really want to engage with other children. He liked to do certain activities and he would focus on those, but it was very hard to get him to do anything else. Very little eye contact, really very little interaction and engagement at all. So those were all the sort of things that concerned us and sent us down this path of trying to find out what there was there that was making him different in his development to what we'd seen with our daughter Phoebe. And eventually we discovered that James had autism with some associated learning difficulties. And our journey with him since then has been to try and enter into his world and then draw him a bit more into our world as well. And so now he's very different in that we get eye contact with him all the time. He engages with us. He's very focused on us in his communication with us. He likes to play with us and to enjoy our company, and will seek us out and wants to do stuff with us.
That's brilliant.
And he's also really picked up some skills that have been helpful to him. So, for example, he's really great with his computer, with his iPad, that kind of stuff. He can really use those effectively. His iPad he can use to help him communicate as well. There's an app on that helps him to be able to communicate his needs and the different things that he wants to do, and to help him to engage with us in that way. And he also likes to watch videos, play games, and do the other stuff.
Just like what things like boys do, right?
Absolutely. But it was unlocking some of that potential in him. So, for example, with his computer, we realised fairly early on that he liked to use a computer, but he couldn't do it himself. So, for example, I'd sit with him and he would point at the screen, and then I'd click on what he'd pointed at to go through. Back then, the CBeebies website was a real favourite for him. He loved some of the puzzles and the videos and bits and pieces that were on that. And so I got a mouse, an old computer mouse, and converted it so that just one button worked on it, because he'd always get the wrong button if he was trying to do it himself. And plugged this mouse in with just the one button that worked and showed him how to use it. And by the end of that day, just within less than a day, he'd figured out now that he could use this for himself. And he was off going to the CBeebies website and the Disney website and all the other places that he loved to go, and he could do it for himself. And just that sense of achievement for him was just wonderful, and just to see the pleasure in his face of being able to do that stuff for himself. And so it's just looking at those ways creatively of unlocking what's there but struggles to come out, because if you're finding it hard to communicate and to interact with the world around you, it makes it hard sometimes to learn some of that stuff. The way we normally learn is people tell us how to do something. Well, if that's a struggle for you, then you need to look at other ways to communicate and to help children to be able to learn. And this was a great example of how we were able to do that with James.
Absolutely. I think, like you said, the first step of learning something is understanding the communication. And if you have autism, or like you said, on the spectrum, and you don't even understand the actual communication, how are you supposed to learn? So I think technology is a fab way of, teaching young people certain skills. That's brilliant with James. I've got a question, actually. What would you say is the greatest challenge with autism, maybe as a parent? So from your point of view, what's the greatest challenge?
I think the greatest challenge is that because of those communication and interaction and imagination issues that we talked about earlier on, there are times when a child or young person with autism is unable to fully and effectively communicate what they're trying to get
Their
across
needs
you.
to you as a
It might be
parent.
their needs. It might be that they want to tell you something that's wrong, or and as a parent, I'm just not getting it. I'm just not understanding what he's trying to get across to me. And sometimes that can just build up in frustration for him to the point where he can really go into a sort of meltdown of stress and anxiety. Just he wants to communicate to me, and he finds it upsetting that he can't. I find it hard when I don't get what he's trying to say to me. And so looking at what the triggers are for that and trying to understand what maybe the common things might be that could send him into that kind of anxious state is really important for me as a parent, to minimize the amount of times that happens, but also to look for ever more creative ways to communicate even more effectively with him.
It's getting creative as a parent as well, isn't it? Trying to think of
is.
different ways, that maybe aren't as conventional as maybe someone who doesn't have additional needs,
Yeah,
right?
if somebody had said to me, actually, the way that you're going to be able to communicate with your son is through an app on an iPhone or an iPad, I'd say, wow, that's amazing, but it wouldn't have been the first thing I'd thought of.
Absolutely.
And, so looking at different ways of communicating really effectively and creatively can make a big difference. And so in a children's and youth work setting, for example, looking at ways in which you communicate effectively what your program's going to be.
Give
to
us
a
an
child or young
example, because I
person.
know you travel, across the UK talking about this. Tell me an example.
Okay, well, an example is so a child or young person with autism may find it really, and often will find it really important to know what the program's going to be. To
Routine,
know,
right?
Yeah, is it going to be different this week to last week? What are we going to be doing? Where are the various stages of the program? So for James, sometimes, and it works well in a number of settings with other children and young people, having a visual timetable, so effectively pictures that represent each part of the program, and that child or young person can have a photo of themselves too, and that photo can move along, so as each part of the program changes, so you go from a worship time to a talk time to
Yeah.
a snack time or whatever it might be, you move the picture along. That child or young person then knows exactly where they are in the program. They know what's coming next. They know what there is still to go with the program. So for example, James really likes snack time. That's really important.
I think
for
we
him.
all like snack time,
We
let's be
love
honest, Mark.
snack times. And so if he knows that snack time's coming, then that can be really helpful to him, and maybe he'll cope better with the activity that's happening before snack, knowing that snack time's coming soon. So having that visual timetable that can help to support, maybe even with a child or young person that can speak and that can understand language, but that just needs a bit of extra support to actually be able to have for themselves a timetable that's got pictures that shows them what's coming next and where they are on that program, can be really, really helpful. And actually that can work with a lot of different additional needs, and also with very young children as well.
I think that's brilliant because, like you said, it's very visual. From the research I've done on autism this week, I saw some great videos. Do you know Temple Grandin?
Mm-hmm.
Temple Grandin. For those guys who aren't familiar with Temple Grandin, she has a lovely name. This amazing lady. They made a film about her actually, who's an autistic activist, and she did a lot of fieldwork in genetics and animal behaviour. She's got a doctorate in it. She's like a PhD student. Anyway, she did some talks on about autism, and she has a very visual mind, hasn't she? She literally sees things in her mind as pictures, like you would see in a book, like you would see on a TV screen, and she can just draw them out because she's got like what I'd say is a gift. Like many people, like we're talking about additional needs, labeling it as that for autism, Asperger's, etc. But actually, I always think it's kind of like a superhero power. It's kind of like a gift. I always think, like even there's those difficulties, like you see the world in such a great way that, many of us, don't get that chance. You see things, obviously like your routine, you see things very, A, B, C, D, but also I think there's that, seeing the best in everything as well. Like I find a lot of my autistic friends, I've got a few autistic friends, they're brilliant, and you just know, well, hopefully they're not lying to me. I know that they're just completely blunt, they're completely straight what they think. And sometimes I find it hilarious in situations where I I think, oh, you shouldn't say that, but everyone's thinking it. And I thought actually maybe, looking at the symptoms, maybe I'm autistic, because I tend to say that. Then I realise actually I do have that filter of knowing when to say something, when not to, but I just say it anyway, and that just makes me rude. That's a bit different. But tell me more maybe about that experiences. Do you have that with James or other autistic children, saying things maybe that aren't quite appropriate?
That can be quite common, because you're right. Many of us have that filter. We might think something quite rude, but we translate that into something a bit more polite, because we know that saying that rude thing might upset somebody, might hurt their feelings. It may be difficult for them to hear. Some children, young people with autism don't have that filter, or it's not as effective, and so they will come out with something that can sound quite blunt, but actually it's quite truthful, and they will say what they feel, what's perhaps on their heart, and sometimes that can be a little bit difficult, but at least you're not having that.
You're not being around the
false
bush,
view.
are you?
Yeah.
Just saying how it is.
But there was that thing you picked up on earlier about how sometimes people with autism and with Asperger's can have a real gift, and that's so true. You've got people who are wonderful musicians, pianists, for example, who have picked up that skill really, really quickly.
Like prodigies, like Mozart apparently had Asperger's. They think he had it, didn't they?
Well, it's always hard to know for sure, but certainly, there are people like Mozart who displayed traits that could be linked to Asperger's, and I've heard similar things said about Einstein, about
Susan Boyle as well,
possibly
Tim Burton,
lots
all these
of different people. Alan Turing, who the code-breaker at Bletchley Park in the Second World War.
Wow.
Loads of people who could have displayed autistic tendencies and use those to focus on specific areas that they would geniuses at and absolutely brilliant at, and often it is finding that thing, that area,
is it that hobby that
child
interest?
or young person actually can really excel at, and again, this isn't for every child or young person with autism. It's a spectrum, and so there's a wide variety here, but for some that can just unlock a whole new world for them as well, and take them into a world of music or computers or whatever their skill might be.
It's encouraging them in that, isn't it? Like,
it is,
I've seen all these documentaries on, like you said, child prodigies who are also autistic, and like you said, because they tend to have a lot of routines, a lot of, like you said, they want to stick in schedules. That can actually be a positive thing, because they're so focused on their gift, they excel in it. I think we can really encourage young people in that. So we're going to have to be, again, I'm sorry, Mark, I've got to put on some adverts, saying things to people. So anyway, I will be back, but I would love to hear your experiences, your questions. It's a bit quiet on the Twitter today. There's no football match on, I think, So anyway, let me know your thoughts, experiences. I'm opening up the phone lines as well, so if you want to be on air and you want to chat to Mark and I have got a few questions about autism, or maybe you disagree with some of the things you said, let us know. Here's how you can get in touch. See you soon.
Call 020 7316 0101. Text gospel to 66777 or tweet at Premier Gospel. Awkward. Honest answers to awkward questions. Lucy Maskell. Sponsored by Urban Saints.
Written by youth workers for youth workers, Premier Youth Work is the essential magazine for church growth. If there's a youth worker in your church, order them a free copy today so they can share the ideas, resources and guidance that come jam-packed in every issue. Resources like the meeting guide, which can help youth workers plan, prepare and present a meeting that will keep younger members coming back for more.
Resources like games and icebreakers. They're not trivial or a waste of time. They're vital and a great way to introduce big ideas and new concepts to young people.
So even if you're not a youth worker, go to premier.org.uk/youthwork and get a free copy now. premier.org.uk/youthwork.
Every day, refugee children are forced to flee from vicious conflicts in the Democratic Republic of Congo and Sudan. When they arrive at the refugee camps in Uganda, many are severely traumatized and malnourished. Today, there's a staggering 25,000 orphaned and vulnerable children who need food now. Feed the Hungry, Premier's Charity of the Year, is ready to feed them, but can only do so with the support of friends like you. Just £4 a month will feed a severely malnourished child for an entire month. Please call right now, 0844 414 8120. 0844 414 8120.
Joy is love singing. Peace is love resting. Kindness is love's touch. Faithfulness is love's habit. Come and discover the faces of love at the Total Woman Conference 2014, Wednesday 2nd to Sunday 6th July. Speakers are host Olayemi Adeleke,
multiply, subdue, have dominion.
Funke Adi Tuberu,
Sowing cheerful seed is bringing a cheerful harvest.
Celia Collins,
Whenever you find wisdom, you will always find power.
Susan Noreen,
God will restore unto you all the years that the locust has eaten.
and Susie C. Owens.
Her mouth provoked an action from Jesus.
Special events are Women in Ministry Breakfast, Special Single Men's Dinner, More Than Lipstick Seminar, and Minding the Mind of a Man with Andrew Adeleke, Kofi Banful, and Omawumi Afoye. Venue, The Lighthouse, Camberwell, SE50DP. Register online at TotalWomanMinistries.org or call 0207-277-4312.
God is dead.
The gripping story about the courage of a university student who risks everything by taking on his atheist professor.
I think you're here kind of hoping that this stuff is for real.
God's Not Dead, the UK top 20 box office must-see hit movie that will build your faith. God's Not Dead, rated PG. See it at cinemas nationwide, including Northern Ireland, this bank holiday weekend. Visit godsnotdeadthemovie.com/UK.
Awkward with Lucy Maskell. Sponsored by Urban Saints. Changing the future, one life at a time.
Well, I've just had a few comments and tweets in, so I'm just going to read some out. Shout out to Dan in Bath. Thanks for listening. It's great to have you as a first-time listener. He just texted me and he said, it's great to listen to the show with different perspectives, hearing Mark's point of view. And also I mentioned my awkward moment of asking my friend if they're pregnant when actually they weren't, and he said he's had the same experience. So thank you, Dan. I'm not the same. I'm not, that's the same. I'm not on my own. I've also had a comment on Facebook from Hannah, who actually works with autistic young kids every day. So shout out to you, Hannah. That is an awesome job. And she says people with autism, they have a larger focus on specific senses and sometimes communicate through them, and they shift their moods quite a lot, and find it hard to deal with loud music as well as bright lights, colours and shapes. But she says a lot of autistic people she works with are quite independent, some more dependent than others, and it's a blessing to know someone with autism, she says. She says, I believe that society should let the guard down and get to know what it's like to be autistic. It might just give people a better look on life. What are your thoughts, Mark?
Wow, yeah, I couldn't agree with that more. That's absolutely brilliant. And yeah, what she's saying is absolutely true about different senses as well. It's again, it's a spectrum, so each person is different with this. But yeah, people will have much more of a sensory value.
Sensory value, like sensory emphasis in the way they learn.
That's the one. And it could be through hearing, it could be through sight, it could be through touch, taste. James likes to taste things. He really gets the world through that taste sense as well. But loud noise really upsets him. So it's knowing which of the senses are stronger for him, which ones he relies on more, which ones can cause him some trouble, and that will be different for every child, young person or adult that has autism. So it's again just working out which of those senses are more acute for them, and how they use them. And as the person said, just they use them to communicate. They use them in a broad range, and it's important for us to understand that and be able to then use those senses to more effectively communicate. Like we were talking earlier, if they use sight and a visual timetable can be a better way of communicating with them than by talking to them. Then
more than words.
Yeah, absolutely. Using different ways, different methods of communicating. Really, and absolutely right about how the world is a richer world, a better world for having children, young people and adults with autism in it.
Like I said, shout out to people I know who are autistic. I think it's a superhero power rather than an additional need. I'd say it's, an advantage in life, to be honest. But anyway, moving on to the next question I've got, which is everyday life. So we've talked about James, your son, 12-year-old son who's got autism. What about school, Mark? What's that like? Because I'm thinking he must have quite a lot of difficulties at school, and not just visually learning, but routine. A lot of autistic people I've read don't like it when you change routine.
Yeah, routine is something that commonly is really important for children, young people and adults with autism. They like to know what's going to happen. They like things to so often be working in the same way and with the same routine each time. And not everybody, but that's quite a common thing. For James with school, because his autism is quite severe, he's in a specialist autism unit, which is geared around developing and strengthening the things that he can really do well and making the most of those.
Tell me more about that. What makes it different?
So what makes it different is that he's in a much smaller class. So there are only 6 other pupils in his class, and there are 3 staff in his class. So it's almost a sort of 2-to-1 ratio of staff to children. But in that, they've got some specifically timetabled and structured programs for each of those children to get the most from their time at school. So they'll have specific time when they focus on communication and language, and they'll have specialists that will come to really try and help and develop that and to make the most of the language that they've got and to develop that more, but also look at other ways of helping those children to communicate. So, for example, the iPad app that I mentioned earlier was something that came through school. They introduced that and said, wow, this could really help James to communicate more effectively. Let's try that. And it's really starting to work. So lots of structured, planned program for each of the children in his class. And because there's only 6 or 7 of them in the class and 3 staff, they've got that much more focused help, and that can really work. But a lot of children can cope quite well in mainstream school settings as well. Sometimes with a bit of extra help, they may have a teaching assistant that can sit alongside them and just make sure that they can get the most out of the lesson and they understand what's required of them, maybe using just different communication to help them to understand what's being asked of them. And so in a lot of cases, children with autism can settle in a mainstream setting and do well there. Although, there can be challenges as well.
Which I was actually just going to mention, so thank you. Great for moving on to that. With the challenges then, Mark, whether it's routine or maybe just doing something they don't like what happens when your son, for example, James, maybe you had a time where maybe he just kicked off and he's like, I do not want to do anything, I do not want to do this, it's outside my comfort zone, too many sounds, and they start screaming. Tell me more about experience. How do you deal with that?
Yeah, so there are triggers that can occasionally set James off into a really sort of distressing meltdown, and it can be all sorts of things. So he gets transported to school on a minibus that collects him. If the minibus overshoots when it's delivering him back home and parks outside of a neighbouring house, he can't see home, and so he's being asked to get off the minibus, but he can't see home, and that can send him into a state of anxiety and stress, or a transition between something that he's really enjoying doing at school and the next activity. So again, just helping him to understand what the next thing is going to be, visual timetables and all that kind of good stuff to help him to understand that. But sometimes if he's really enjoying something, he thinks, well, why should I stop doing this thing that I'm really enjoying just because you want me to go and do this other activity now? And so that can be hard too. And sometimes it can just be because we're asking him to wear the wrong colour pants.
Really? Wow. I never thought, autistic mind, again, I take advantage of that, go, what pants am I wearing today?
Absolutely.
Oh, it doesn't matter, they're pink, white, spotty, whatever.
Yeah.
Can't have just said that on live radio, but there we go. So anyway,
about pants.
We are talking about pants. It's a very serious show. It's
is.
very awkward. Anyway, Mark, tell me more, maybe in a youth work setting. So let's say we have some people, I'm sure are listening in, who have young people who have Asperger's syndrome. Tell me more about that, actually.
Okay.
What's the difference between Asperger's syndrome? And secondly, so many questions, how can we help young people in a church setting? It's different if you're not a parent.
Okay, so a couple of things in there. What's different about Asperger's syndrome? Well, Asperger's syndrome is an autistic spectrum disorder. It's part of that spectrum. But children and young people with Asperger's syndrome are usually better able to communicate. They can usually speak and communicate quite a bit more effectively. They still have some of those traits about social interaction and social imagination that can be a challenge for them. They are more likely to have that special gift for something amazing.
Modern day Mozart, right?
Oh, yeah, an absolute modern day Mozart could be out there. But they can also still be prone to everything just becoming overwhelming and heading into a bit of a meltdown. And I could give you a great story of a young lad who came to the church group that I'm involved in back in Bournemouth, and so that particular evening, it was the evening club night, and I was stood on the door greeting the kids and parents as they arrived, and I saw this car pull up and a mum and her boy get out, and they headed up the path towards where I was greeting folk. I didn't recognise them, never seen them before, but I could tell that there was a story here. There was something that was very different about these two, and there was something that was going to be quite amazing to hear. And as I was watching them coming up the path, I also noticed that Mum looked absolutely defeated before she even made it to the door. I thought, wow, there's something really powerful happening here, and just waited for them to arrive. And as she arrived with her son, this lady looked at me. She said, "This kids club that you've got here, is it for just church kids, or can anybody from the surrounding area come?" I said, "No, it's anybody age 9 to 13. We're reasonably flexible on that. That can make it here 7 till 8:30. Very much welcome." And I could see that she was building up to something else as well. And she said, "Only my son has Asperger's syndrome, and sometimes that can result in some challenging behaviour when things don't go how he expects them to go. And we've tried to get him into different groups before in kids clubs, but they've always said that they're not geared up for additional needs, or they haven't got the training, or they haven't got enough people to run the group, and so he's never been able to stay. Could he come to your group?" So no pressure then.
No pressure.
And so most of my attention was on this lady and her son. Part of my attention was looking over my shoulder at the room behind me that was already full of kids that were turning up for club. Some of them climbing up the walls and creating absolute mayhem behind me. And I was sort of thinking, well, I wonder where the rest of my team are and why they're not keeping a good eye on all this. But as I looked around the room, I saw 2 or 3 other young people in the group that had Asperger's syndrome or ADHD, or in one case, both,
wow.
Which was an exciting cocktail for him and for us
and
too.
for the group.
Absolutely. And I looked back at this lady and her boy, and I said, "You know what? We'd love for your son to be able to come to our group." And actually, as you'll see, he'll fit right in.
Definitely.
And just that amazing sense of release for her. I literally saw the weight lift from her shoulder. She
wasn't alone. I think that's what she wanted to support. She was thinking, I'm on my own here, no one help. But you guys stepped in. I think as churches, we definitely have to do that, right?
And that's the thing, because she'd been told no so many times. And just imagine what that's like, when it's your son or your daughter that you're wanting to interact and to be a part of a group and be included and be accepted, and yet people just say no, we can't. To say yes is amazing, a wonderful experience, and brilliant for her. I'll never forget it. And a message that I just want to share with everybody: saying yes is saying yes to that child, but also to the family as well, and supporting them, and that's really important too.
Absolutely. Not to be afraid of new horizons and be afraid of new challenges, but actually that person is as much a part of the family of God as anyone who maybe isn't autistic.
And it's not always an easy ride. Yes, there are challenging times along the way, but the rewards are wonderful and really outweigh all of that. And it's great to be able to include those kids and their families in the work of the church.
It's great to hear the enthusiasm in your voice too. I can tell you've got such a natural passion, and that's definitely from God. So after a few songs, I'm going to be reading out not maybe top 10, but top 3, 4, 5 things that autistic people have told me they don't like it when you tell them these things. So yeah, if you want to find out more, you have to stay tuned. But also, if you're autistic, or maybe you've got Asperger's syndrome, or you've got ADHD, tweet me at Premier Gospel, drop a message on facebook.com/Premier Gospel, or phone or text me in. Let me know what it's actually like to be autistic. I don't know what it's like to be autistic. Like I said, I read out things, what I say, and turns out to be rude. But that's not autism. That's just me being me. Anyway, let me know your thoughts. We'll be back after these songs. So, Mark, we were chatting before the break about your son in school and the difficulties he's had. Can I read you out things I've been told not to say to an autistic person?
Oh, yeah, go for it.
Cool. Well, okay, I found this on the National Autistic website, National Autistic Society, sorry, so check that out if you can. So things not to say to an autistic person, whether they're a child or adult. Number one, don't patronise us. Some of us are very high educated, which I think we agreed, didn't we, Mark? Some
Absolutely.
autistic people are child prodigies. Jim Henson, who created the Muppets, autistic.
Loads of people out there that you can mention, but also even the non-famous people that have autism, because communication may be a bit difficult for them, doesn't mean to say that they can't think and they're not intelligent. And it's often a misconception that people perhaps aren't as intelligent as anybody else, but there can be a genius brain in there, and it's just finding the key to unlock that,
Absolutely.
and how to then apply that genius to that gift or skill that person might have.
Brilliant. Okay, well, number two, we're doing this countdown again, it says, please don't just grab us by the arm, ask us if we'd like help.
Yeah, and that's because of that sensory thing that we were talking about earlier on. Some people with autism will find touch to be a sense that's particularly heightened for them. So, I mean, it's not great to grab somebody anyway, but if you're particularly sensitive to touch and then somebody grabs you, that can be really hard. And if you aren't able to really understand as well as you might things like body language and facial expression, you don't know perhaps why that person's grabbed you. Are they grabbing you because they're going to attack you, or are they grabbing you because they want to ask you something?
To reassure you,
You know, it could be for all sorts of reasons, but it's not that easy maybe to figure out why. And so for sensory reasons and for communication reasons, it's something that can be a real problem.
Absolutely. Cool. Thanks for that. Number three. Don't assume that we need healing. Now, I know Mark and I were talking off air about this. I think, as a hyper charismatic Christian, I'm going to have to admit, I'm not ashamed to say, I really, believe that God heals a day, seeing people be healed by God, just by praying for them, seeing things grow back, seeing people's, people getting healed really. So I believe that we can see God's kingdom come in people and have them healed like in the Bible, but disability sometimes, like me and Mark will chat about this, won't we? That actually some people don't want to be healed, or they're not meant to be, because it's not a disability, it's actually, like you said, a gift. Right?
Yeah, absolutely. And my view on this is that, yeah, absolutely God can heal. I completely believe that God can heal today, just as he healed, as Jesus healed 2,000 years ago. That can happen today as well. And like you, I've seen evidence of that, with my own eyes. But I also think that when we're looking at people with autism, we're looking at part of their character, part of their personality that's bound up in this autism. And so to pray for healing for that would be to effectively pray for their personality and their character to be completely changed.
You want to change James
too.
to the world?
I don't want to change his personality. I love him to bits the way he is. What I would pray for is for, and I do pray for, is for him to be able to have better communication with us, to be able to be able to communicate more effectively with us, or for us to be able to understand better the things that can send him into one of those meltdowns that can be so distressing for him and for us, and to spare him from some of that real distress that he goes through during those times. So I pray into those things, but to pray for him to be healed from his autism would be like saying that I wanted a completely different son, and I don't. I love James. He's my son.
Brilliant. Number 4, which is also a controversial one, things not to say to an autistic person if you just tuned in. Number 4, we are not disabled because of our sin. Again, that's quite controversial. That's quite awkward.
It is awkward, and as the show talks about these awkward issues, yes, there are people out there that think that disabilities generally, and autism can be included amongst that, are because somebody's done something something wrong, either the person themselves or their parents or something, and that is just so totally not
awkward theology.
Yeah,
not okay.
It's not what God teaches us, and God doesn't cause us to have disabilities because of the sins in our lives or things that our parents may have done wrong in the past. He's a God of forgiveness. He's a God of compassion. He's a God of love. He's a God of grace.
Absolutely.
And none of those things go with him giving people a disability because of something else that's happened in somebody's life. So, really think that I know that theology is out there, but couldn't be more wrong in my eyes.
Absolutely, I agree with you there, Mark. If you disagree with what we just said, tweet me at Premier Gospel. Drop me a text, first word gospel 66777. That's 66777. Let me know your thoughts on this. Okay, and finally, number 5, things not to say to an autistic person. We are not special. You don't have to really admire us. We're just people like you.
Absolutely, and that's the thing that across a whole range of different additional needs and disabilities, people, whether they're young people or adults, just want to be treated like everybody else. They want to be included. They want to be able to access the things that everybody else is accessing. But hey, that's the same for all of us, isn't it? We all want to be included. We all want to be able to connect into the things that we enjoy, and we want that to be as easy as possible for us. And so whether we've got a disability or not, we all have that same desire to do that, to connect in, to be included, to access the things that are interesting for us. And so people don't want to be viewed as different. They just want to be
you're so special.
Given that opportunity to be the same and to access things in the same way as everybody else.
Oh, you have different needs, or special needs. Oh, isn't that great? Yeah, it comes across quite patronising, isn't it? I think if I was autistic, I find patronising. I get that anyway, so I know that's you're special. But anyway, I think we have to take a bookmark on that again. Sorry about that, Mark, but you've got so many great stories and ideas. We're going to have to wrap up the show after these few songs. So if you have a question for Mark, get it in now. Tweet me at Premier Gospel. And also, if you are online, you can check the music if you're enjoying the music, or maybe you're not. Check the Twitter feed. Don't have to have Twitter. Twitter.com/Premier Gospel. Yeah, that's right. Awkward with Lucy Maskell. Well, that was awkward. Thank you so much for listening in. If you've made it this far, if you just tuned in, where you have been. We have been chatting about autism, chatting about youth work and the difficulties, challenges, but also things that God is doing in the lives of our young people with autism. So, Mark, Arnold, oh my goodness, I can't believe the show's basically nearly ended. Would you be able to tell the listeners more about the events that you've got coming up, equipping youth workers in ministering to autistic people?
Absolutely. Yeah, it's flown by, hasn't it? It's really gone quick. So, yeah, there are a bunch of things happening next month even that link into what we've been talking about this evening. Churches for All have a conference called Enabling Church, which is in West Bromwich in the Midlands on the 3rd of June, and there's an inclusion stream for that. I'm going to be speaking along with a bunch of other people at that. We've got All Inclusive, which is an Urban Saints training program, which we've been running in churches for the last couple of years. We've had almost 1,000 children's and youth leaders and people connected to children's and youth work in those churches that have been through that program already. And we've got events coming up. If you're listening out there in Ireland, then in Dublin on the 12th of June. And if you are from Kent and can get along to City Praise Centre in Gravesend on the 21st of June, or if you're down in the West Country and can get to Belmont Chapel in Exeter on the 28th of June, then we're going to be running stuff in each of those locations through June as well. So there's also a conference happening up in the northeast of the UK, a conference called NEOS, which is being hosted by Youth Work, and that's up on the 14th of June as well, and there's an inclusion stream for that too. So there's loads going on, and lots of opportunities for people to come and hear more about inclusion, more about how they can help to support, include and give access to the children and young people they're working with that may have autism or Asperger or a whole range of other additional needs and disabilities. And then there's lots of ways that people can connect online as well. We've got a Facebook group. So if you're listening and you use Facebook, then go and look for Additional Needs Alliance. That's Additional Needs Alliance Facebook group. Come and join us there. If you've got more questions that you want to ask, there's a whole load of us that connect into that Facebook group that have real experience in a whole range of different additional needs, disabilities, working with children and young people. Lots of people that just share on there, share resources, share ideas, share inspiration. And just a great place for people to meet and speak about this stuff. So Additional Needs Alliance Facebook group, come and look at that too.
Thank you very much, Mark, for all those plugs. I hope you get along to some of those events, guys, if you are around those areas, Kent Island, etc. It's well worth hearing. As you've heard, Mark Arnold, he's got such a genuine heart for young people with additional needs. Also, if you are on Twitter, you can follow Mark Arnold at Mark_J_Arnold. That's at Mark_J_Arnold. It's like a dance on my mouth. Anyway, Mark, thanks so much for coming to the studio all the way from Bournemouth. It's a bank holiday weekend, so I appreciate it. Got to get back to the family, right?
Yeah, absolutely. But it's been a really great time to be here sharing with you and just sharing with the folk that are listening. So thank you so much for having me along, Lucy.
Well, thank you so much for being in the studio. I'm not actually going to go just yet, guys. I've got to plug you next week's show. But in the meantime, here's from Jermaine Douglas with His Eye is on the Sparrow. Thank you, Mark. See you soon.
Thanks. Bye.
Well, it's nearly time to go, guys. This is Lucy Maskell on Premier Gospel Music for Life, and you've just been listening to Awkward. We've talked about autism, and I thought it was a great show. I hope you guys enjoyed it too. This episode will be available on podcast. Check out the official Awkward podcast with all the episodes you can listen to for free. Isn't it great with all the music too? Go to mixcloud.com/awkward-show or go to premiergospel.org.uk/awkward. Well, what's happening next week? Well, I'm actually going to be away, so I'm going to have a guest presenter. DJ Wayne Marshall from Colourful Radio, shout out to Wayne, is going to be taking over as a guest presenter, and he's going to be interviewing a good friend of mine called Fabrice, who has an amazing story of his life, amazing testimony of how he grew up in gangs, all about hustling, and actually had this amazing supernatural encounter with God, and now he's just going for God and youth work, and he's got a lot of wisdom to share. So if you've enjoyed tonight's show, again, log on to the podcast. But I just wanted to leave you also with a thought from Galatians 3:28 about inclusion. There is neither Jew nor Gentile, neither slave nor free, nor is there male and female, for you're all one in Christ Jesus. I think, guys, sometimes when we share the gospel, we can forget how much God has included us in his plan to save the world, but also just to know him and know ourselves more and to love the world. So, guys, if you're chatting to someone today about what God's doing in your life, just remember that we're all included, no matter where we're from, what colour, background, what we look like. God loves us all the same. That sounds cheesy, but it's true. So have a great week and stay tuned for Premier Gospel Presents. See you in 2 weeks. God bless.